Okay, so today's notes, Math 3, Notes 8, Section 4, for Unit 8, sorry, is we're going to look a little more at how to solve trigonometric equations. And remember, okay, our sine is directly related to our y-coordinate, and because it's related to that y-coordinate, the sine is positive in which quadrants? 1 and 2. Anything above the x-axis has a positive y-coordinate, and then negative sine is going to be negative below the x-axis on quadrants 3 and 4. Cosine is directly related to what? The x-coordinate, and so cosine is going to be positive where? On the right side, 1 and 4, and it'll be negative on the left-hand side, 2 and 3. Tangent is a ratio of y over x. So that ratio will be positive when both y and x are positive, so that's in quadrant 1. But when also will it be positive? When they're both negative. A negative divided by a negative is positive, and so that's in quadrant 3. Now, if one of them is positive and one of them is negative, then you get a negative result, so that can happen in quadrant 2 or 4. Okay, so we're gonna be having to think this way when we're solving for variables. Okay, so we're asked to identify all the possible quadrants in which the terminating ray for theta could lie, and here this states that the sine is less than 0. In other words, the y-coordinate is negative. Okay, if it's less than 0, it's negative. So where is the y-coordinate negative? What quadrants? We just stated it, 3 and 4. Okay, here where it's asking where the tangent is positive, or where y over x is positive, and we just kind of, again, we can look up here and see what we said. So 1 and 3, right? Okay. Sine squared is positive. A little different. So you have to, we need to get rid of the square. So if a sine, if you square a number and you get a positive answer, what kind of number, what does that say about the sine? This means the sine of theta is positive or negative, or both. It could be either, right? Because if you square a positive number, it's positive. If you square a negative, it's negative. So sine's either going to be positive or negative. So if you get that plus or minus thing, it could be in any quadrant, right? So all 4 quadrants. And then cosine squared is negative. So you're squaring a number and you're getting a negative answer. It's impossible if you're working with real numbers. If you're working with imaginary numbers, it could happen. But we're only working with positive or real numbers here, and so there's no real solution to this, or no quadrants. Not going to happen. Okay. So this 30, 60, 90 triangles, there's 2 that I want you guys to memorize, and there's something special about these 30, 60, 90 and the 45, 45, 90. Maybe that's why they got married. When I was at their wedding, I gave them a card and I told them, you guys are just right for each other. And so across from 30, we said the length is 1. This is 2. This is root 3. Okay. These are both 1. This is root 2. This is root 3. This is 1 and 2. Okay. And we want to solve. We want to solve for certain trigonometric equations, and we want to find our answers are going to be angles somewhere between 0 and 360 degrees. Okay. So if 0 and 360 are what kind of angles? 0 and 360. What's the terminology? We studied this last time we were together. They're at the same location, and so we say they are coterminal, right? 0 and 360 are coterminal. So if we're at that location at 0 or 360, according to this, which answer would we say? Would you say 0 or would we say 360? Which one should we include? One has the equal sign, one doesn't, right? So this is saying, well, if you're at that location, include 0. So this is saying find all the angles just going around the circle one time from 0 to 360 that would meet this requirement. So 4 times the sine squared of that angle minus 3 is going to equal 0. So find as many solutions as you can between 0 degrees and 360 that would make that equation work. Okay, that's what we're trying to find. Well, the first step is to solve for sine first. Let's see what sine's equal to. And so in doing that, we're going to add 3 to both sides. And then what? Divide by 4. We get sine squared theta is 3 over 4. But we don't want sine squared, we want sine. So one more step. Take the square root. And when you take the square root, what is the sine of theta going to equal? Plus or minus, I like that. And then keep going, what else? Square root of 3 over the square root of 4, which is plus or minus square root of 3 over 2. Right? Because the square root of 4 is 2. Okay? So this is step 1. Okay? Step 1, solve for the trig function. Okay? Solve for either sine, cosine, or tangent. That was step 1. Okay? And then step 2 and step 3 kind of happen together. And you want to ask yourself 2 questions at this point. So first thing, well, 2 questions, and they kind of happen. It doesn't matter what order you do. But the questions are this. What's my reference angle? You only have 3 choices. 30, 45, or 60. Okay? So 30, 45, or 60 degrees. Sorry. And you guys have done stuff like this where you're trying to figure out, okay, sine SOHCAHTOA, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, right? And can you guys tell which one we're working with here? 60, right? Because if you look at sine of 60, root 3 would be the opposite. Hypotenuse would be 2. And you go root 3 over 2. Now, it's plus or minus, so that's something else. But we know, okay, our reference angle is 60 degrees. The other question you're asking is which quadrant? And in this problem, we have the sine of theta is positive or negative, the plus or minus. And if we have that plus or minus, what do we say? It's all of them, right? Positive or negative, okay? And each quadrant will give you, each quadrant that you're able to work in will give you an answer. So we're going to have, because we're going to have 4 quadrants, we're going to have 4 answers. And so that's kind of, step 2 is to ask those 2 questions. We'll say that, okay? Ask those 2 questions, get answers to those 2 questions. That's your step 2. Okay. And so we said all 4 quadrants. Okay. So now we know our reference angle is 60 degrees. We know this is going to happen in all 4 quadrants. So then draw 60 degrees in all 4 quadrants. And remember, it's the reference angle is always from your x-axis, never the y-axis. So from my x-axis, I'm gonna in quadrant 1, I'm gonna move up 60 degrees. So okay, there's 1. In quadrant 2, from the x-axis, I'm gonna move up 60 degrees. There's 2. From my x-axis, I'm gonna move down 60 degrees. That's the 3rd. And from my, again, same with in quadrant 4, move down 60 degrees. Okay. And if I could find out where those 4 arrows are pointed, those are my 4 answers. So here is 0 degrees. In quadrant 1, I'm going to go up 60 degrees from there. And so remember, we're going clockwise around here, or counterclockwise. So 60 degrees right here is my first answer that would work. And then in quadrant 2, where am I pointed? What was it? 120, because if I go a full half circle, is 180, and I go back 60, I'm at 120. That's my second answer. And then if what's the one in the 3rd quadrant? So I go 60 past 180, and you're at 220. No, 240, right? Because you're adding 60 to 180. And how about the one in quadrant 4? 300, because if you go a full circle, you're at 360, but then you go back 60 and you're at 300. And so those are your 4 answers. And so you report that. So theta could be 60, 120, 240, or 300. And those are all 4 of those would make that equation work. Okay? That's what you do to solve these types of equations. Step 1, solve for the trig function. Step 2, ask those 2 questions. What reference angle, which quadrants, and then find those 4 pieces. Try it with the next problem. 10 cosine theta minus 5 equals 0. What did you guys do first when you were solving? Add 5. So 10 cosine theta is 5. Second step, divide by 10. So cosine theta is 5 over 10. Reduce that to 1 over 2. And it's not cosine squared, so we just stop there. That's step 1. So a little shorter here. Okay. Step 2, you ask 2 questions. Okay. What's my reference angle? Okay, and so you look at those 2 special right triangles. It's either going to be 30, 45, or 60. Which one gives you the cosine of theta is 1/2? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And if you look at the 60 degrees, adjacent is 1, and hypotenuse is 2, and it works out. So our reference angle is 60 degrees. And then we ask in what quadrants? Okay. So in order to find our quadrants, we got to take note that, okay, this is cosine, and cosine is positive. It's equal to positive 1/2. And so if if the x value is positive, and you can even look back up here, we see that the cosine's positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. So quadrants 1 and 4. Okay, so then we draw 60 degrees into quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. And if we borrow from our previous problem, we've already found those locations at 60 degrees and 300 degrees. And so answer is theta 60 and 300 degrees. Question on that one? Okay. Next one. 2 times the tangent squared theta minus 6. Actually, we're going to skip that one. Let's do the next one. Okay. Notice we have one factor times another factor equal to 0. Okay, when you have two factors or something like this factored set equal to 0, we've had this scenario before, not with trig, but we've had it with other things. How did we proceed from here and solve this? What did we do? Okay, distributing is actually the opposite of what you want to do, because let me give you something that you're familiar with. If I had x plus 2 times x minus 5 equals 0, and I said solve for x, would you distribute that? What would you do? You'd set each one equal to 0. You'd say x plus 2 is 0, and x minus 5 is 0, and then solve them separately and say, well, x is negative 2 and x is positive 5. You've done that a lot, right? That's what's happening here. You're just not used to doing with trig, but it's factored already for us. And so what we want to do next, don't distribute it. That makes it more complicated. But separate it. So root 2 cosine theta plus 1 is 0. And 2 sine theta minus 1 equals 0. So I'm separating them. And I have it's like I have two separate problems now to solve. So I need to go through those steps with both of them now. Each one will give me some answers, and then for the final answer, you combine those answers. Okay? On the left-hand side, I'm going to solve for cosine. And I get cosine theta equals negative 1 over root 2. Okay? How did I do that? I divided both sides by root 2. So you can simplify it further if you'd like. And you could write cosine theta, multiply top and bottom by root 2, and you get negative root 2 over 2. Is that what you're asking? Both are fine. Yeah, do that. Okay. Next, on the other one, if I solve for sine theta, I get 2 sine theta is equal to 1. Divide by 2, and I get sine theta is equal to 1/2. Okay. So then for both of these, I got to ask the question, what's my reference angle? What quadrants? Okay, so on the cosine one, I want the reference angle. And when we're thinking reference angle, it's actually easier to look at this one, 1 over root 2, than it is with the simplified one, right? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And if you look at our triangles, which one does that correspond with? The 45, right? Okay. And so we know our reference angle is 45. And then which quadrants would this happen in? So cosine is negative. Cosine's your x value, or related to the x coordinates, so the left side is the negative side, so that'd be quadrants 2 and 3. Okay. And then we ask the same two questions for the sine of theta is 1/2. What would our reference angle be here? Which angle has an opposite side of 1 and a hypotenuse of 2? If you look at the pictures above, you get 30 degrees. Okay. And in which quadrants is sine positive? 1 and 2. Okay. So here I'm going to have two separate pictures, one for the left, one for the right. So on the left side, I have 45 degrees drawn in quadrant 2 and 3. And the x-axis at that point, we have 180 degrees. And so if I go back 180, if I go back 45 from 180, where do I end up? 135. If I go forward 45, you get 225. So those are the two answers to the cosine part. And then for the sine part, we're going to put 30 degrees in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So always 30 from the x-axis, never from the y-axis. So that's 30 from 0, which is 30. And that's 30 back from 180, so 150. And so all four of those, you put them together for our final answer. So we got 30 degrees. I'll put them in order. 135 would be next, then 150, and then 225. Okay. Why don't you guys take a quick look at your homework? Okay, so on the homework, 1 through 10, you're asked just to find out which quadrants this is happening, so it's positive or negative. If you see a square, you got to take a square root. But be careful. If you see something squared and it's equal to a negative, or that can't happen, right? So you say it doesn't happen. And then you're working through solving, just like we did. We want to work through those 3 steps, solve for that trig function, and then ask those 2 questions. What's my reference angle? It's either going to be 30, 45, or 60. And what quadrants am I in? And looking through this, seems like everything's going to work out pretty good. And then remember, if it's factored like number 20 or 21, you got to separate into 2 separate problems and do them separately, okay? And then this is a review one. We've done this, I think, section 2. Remember how to split that into 2 right triangles, yeah. So I'm going to stop there and let you guys get started in the homework.